I didn't say a word when they handed me that eviction notice. I just slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table and watched 35 McMansions turn into lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could steal my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. These pompous bureaucrats built their perfect suburban paradise on stolen land, complete with tennis outfit Karens patrolling in golf carts. What they didn't know, I'm an Army Corps engineer. That little earth dam on my property had been waiting 45 years for someone stupid enough to build downstream. The audacity was truly something to behold until the spillway gates opened and their luxury development got its first taste of natural flooding. Let me introduce you to Jake Morrison. That's me. 34 years old, Army Corps of Engineers and the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, who we all called Pops, bought this property back in 1955 when Austin was still a sleepy college town, and barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies by about 1,000 to 1. Pops was the kind of man who believed in taking care of the land and the people on it. In 1978, he built a small earth dam on our property. Nothing fancy, just good engineering designed to collect rainwater for the cattle and help out our downstream neighbors during dry spells. The Army Corps of Engineers even helped him with the design. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan where I specialized in water management and infrastructure. Turns out building wells and managing water flow in a war zone teaches you a thing or two about how precious clean water really is and how quickly people will fight over it. While I was on my second deployment, Pops passed away. The property went into a trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister Sarah, who lives in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She hired a local property management company called Lanier Land Services to handle the taxes and upkeep. Enter our villain, Maggie, Thornwell, 52 years old, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis outfits like business attire. Maggie's got that particular brand of passive-aggressive sweetness that Southern women perfect around age 45. You know, the kind where they'll smile while they're stabbing you in the back and somehow make it sound like they're doing you a favor. Maggie's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, which should tell you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's got a reputation for neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is fancy talk for forcing out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. I came home from deployment in August 2023, ready to finally spend some real time on Pop's land. Drove down that familiar gravel road, past the old oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid, expecting to see the same rolling pastures and that little earth dam sparkling in the Texas sun. Instead, I found construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes scattered across my back 40 like some kind of suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different somehow, angrier. I could taste the dust and my own rising fury as I marched up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not looking sorry at all. "We got permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up and explained with obvious discomfort that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Apparently, when nobody's actively using land for a certain period, and if you can prove you've been improving it, you can sometimes claim ownership. That's when Maggie appeared, riding up in her little golf cart like some kind of suburban warlord. Her voice had that syrupy sweetness that immediately made me want to check my wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But here's what really got my blood boiling. I discovered that her construction crews had diverted the small creek that feeds Pop's dam. The water level was dropping every single day, and with it 45 years of careful water management that had helped our neighbors through droughts, floods, and everything in between. I hired the first attorney I could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted me $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. Turns out while I was serving my country, Maggie's husband, Rick, had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land went from agricultural preservation to residential development zone faster than you can say conflict of interest. But here's where my Army Corps training came in handy. While that overpriced lawyer was shuffling papers and billing hours, I was digging through the county records like I was hunting for IEDs. And just like in Afghanistan, the devil was in the details. I found Pop's original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were beautiful. See, Pops didn't just build that dam himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction. And here's your first knowledge nugget: any dam built with federal guidance creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs can't override, period. But wait, it gets better. While I was photocopying permits at the courthouse, I stumbled across a 1923 water rights deed buried in the old records. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those McMansions sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing my property, they were stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the victim. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off in advance. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, talking about children's safety and neighborhood security. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news is they love a good story, but they're not always great with follow-up research. If they'd bothered to check, they would have found that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. That's when I called my old Army buddy Tony Riggs, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. "Jake," Tony said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras around the property perimeter, time-stamped photos of every water diversion, flow measurements at 3 different points along the creek. My sister Sarah called from California, begging me to just take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. Here's the thing about water rights in Texas. They're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal. But you have to know how to fight for them. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 3 years. Each time, the story was the same: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. Maggie decided to turn up the heat. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at my property entrance like some kind of suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious activity. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation. Loud music complaints when I ran my radio during farm work. Unsightly structures citations for my perfectly functional farmhouse that had been standing since 1962. Environmental hazards reports about my septic system that had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when Rick used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through veteran services. Apparently, I was a troubled veteran who might be struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic but thorough. She had to check boxes on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart like she was supervising a military inspection. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. While they were drowning me in paperwork, I was making some phone calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was very interested to learn that Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Turns out any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance, even on private property. And the fines for violations start at $50,000 per day. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Maggie's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd left town just ahead of the federal prosecutors and set up shop here in Austin, looking for new victims. I partnered with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream farmers who'd been affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos brought historical documentation showing his family had used creek water for farming since 1887. Mrs. Chen provided photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, fed by the same creek that was now feeding Maggie's decorative water features. Here's your second knowledge nugget: agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. During my nighttime reconnaissance, old habits from the Army, I discovered something beautiful. Pops Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground spillway channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The mechanism was still functional and it was designed for exactly this situation. I calculated the water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path. 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the exact locations of those new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part: the construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and decorative stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway system was engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood management. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the 3rd time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original agricultural flood management covenant from Pops Dam construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity: dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding. It was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. Amanda Cross's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure $47 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge nugget: insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development. He was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing that EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, providing historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area and brought credibility as the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. My technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering. I created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations, controlled release starting at 6 a.m., gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns without causing structural damage to anything except Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Maggie's desperation reached new levels when she hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were tactical gear wannabes who think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed trying to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was caught on video attempting to jam concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy served as lookout. Tony Riggs had tipped off the sheriff's department and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The technical sabotage escalated when security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a blockage designed to cause actual flooding danger if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the sabotage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury as I realized how far they were willing to go. Rick used his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left in town, privately warned me that this was purely political. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene," he said. "Make it count." At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was magnificent. Not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek and cupped the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed morning show demeanor cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons." Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the interview. Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat with overflow crowds watching through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a three-piece suit army, high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of concerned community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Amanda wearing a simple button-down shirt and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $2.7 million in flood damage from my spillway operation. They wheeled in a psychiatrist who'd never met me, but was happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed with whispers until Amanda stood for our response. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant that legally required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Kim took the stand and testified that my spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any actual property damage. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick as a witness. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction company. When Amanda played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, Rick exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words captured on audio proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor could. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled that my spillway operation was legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease all interference with federal environmental investigations. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Rick Thornwell pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and got banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. My property value restored to $1.2 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development could. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected Guadalupe base populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 4 months. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. Every Sunday I visit Pop's grave and bring creek water in a mason jar just like he used to do when he checked the flow after heavy rains. "Thanks, Pops," I tell him. "The creek's singing again just like you said it would." From my porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. But you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe clean water belongs to everyone. Water finds a way. Justice finds a way. And communities that fight together win together. Willow Creek flows free, and it always will.